Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out People of Reddit. Story 1. Leave a dirty couch behind, forget your letters. Long-time lurker, and I was just reminded one petty story of mine. I moved in an apartment previously occupied by this couple and their dog. The house was a small studio on the 4th floor with very steep and narrow stairs. I'm still baffled, how did they fit in the house, the three of them? Anyway, the day the couple was moving out, they asked me if I wanted to buy their couch, which was already in the house, so I didn't have to struggle bringing a new couch upstairs and they didn't have to get theirs out. They promised that they cleaned it thoroughly, but the stupid person I am, I didn't double check. They were running around that day, but they told me they'll come back later to get the money as they knew where I lived. Now, I went upstairs and the state of the couch was not what they promised. The couch was covered in dog hair. So much that 3 passes with the vacuum didn't do almost anything. To be fair, the whole house was covered in dog hair, so I guess they were immune to it. I didn't have any phone number to let them know that I wasn't interested anymore, so I had to wait. And I stayed with the couch for a month. When finally they decided that it was time to pick their post again and collect my money. When I told them that the price we agreed on wasn't fair on the condition of that couch, they both got mad, but I told them that I'm not asking for a free couch, just a couch that's clean and they can take that couch with them anyway. They asked me for 5 minutes to try arrange transport, and then they eventually only took the pillows with them and told me they'd be back in 3 days to get the rest. As you can guess, I didn't, they never returned for the couch. So, I waited while I was collecting their post getting delivered at my address. You see, they moved from this house because they bought a house and they still had my address as their main one for plenty of their bills and bank statements, which I kept long enough to make sure they wouldn't come back for the couch. And then one day it hit me, and I threw everything in the trash and every envelope that arrived after that too. Eventually some of the envelopes kept coming with warning and last chance on them, and with every envelope I was throwing away I felt better. Only about a year later, one of them showed up and rang the bell to ask me if they had any post delivered here. I simply said no, why would it? If you're wondering about the couch, it went outside at the balcony, the only good perk of the house, so I could sit in the summer. Left outside the whole rainy winter so I could dismantle it easier and throw it out in pieces. Story 2. You screw with my food, I screw with your work. One night after getting home from work, one of my roommates had eaten a lot of the ingredients I had purchased to make a meal. I went to his room and asked him to go replace them ASAP as I wanted to cook dinner and eat. He shrugged and said he was already at work and he can go in the morning. He worked customer support from home. I was pissed and said I needed them now, and he told me to go get stuff myself and he'd Venmo me. I pointed out that it was pissing cats and dogs outside and I don't own a car. He laughed and just shut his door in my face, saying not my issue. I ordered food, but due to the crappy weather there was a 2-3 hour delay, the whole city got flooded and roads were closed. I grabbed my phone and spent over an hour entering chats, opening and closing, with the support devizion of the company he worked for. As I was about to give up, I finally saw my roommate's very unique name in the greeting message. I then spent 2 hours of my life making his life miserable. From demanding to be sold products that never existed, to asking for a manager, to telling him about my imaginary husband's scrotucks. I stayed in the living room and listened to his screams of frustration as I wasted his time and ruined his productivity and target stats at work. They are supposed to do about 2 chats every 15 minutes. Towards the end he even broke script and started begging me to start making sense. At one point I was crying tears of laughter as he smashed his keyboard on the floor and came in the kitchen to smoke. I forgot to mention that he started complaining that some woman was driving him nuts at work. I asked him, "My Vogue giving you a hard time?" And he went pale. I cannot stress how stupid he is. The bot asked for my personal info before I entered support and I had given the name My Vogue Fishy. My Vahaj is fishy. He never noticed it. Safe to say he hasn't touched my food in a while. Story 3. Mind your voice or mind your shoes. Years ago we lived in a flat in a tall downtown building which had been put up during a frenzy in our city provoked by the World Cup. The kind of building made as cheaply as the developers and builders could get away with, wrung their profits out of it and then disappeared, and to hell with whoever has to deal with the shoddy construction later on. Of course, then, there was no insulation between the walls of adjacent flats, just the plasterboard on our side, maybe 1 dm of air space, occasional studs, and the plasterboard on their side. Next to us lived a loose assortment of kids, early 20s, who seemed well funded without having to go to work. They had a big stereo TV, which was an expensive luxury item at the time, complete with big loudspeakers right up against our wall. That was only one source of the constant noise from their flat. Another was frequent parties, small but quite boisterous, and running late into the night. Another was very, very noisy sex. If it wasn't one thing it was another, it was constant and it was extremely tiresome. I do not think we were being unreasonable in finding their noise excessive. Ordinary sounds of life from other people is part of living in other than a detached house on a big property, or a hut in the forest. Sometimes louder than others, all okay, allowances must be made. But lines must also be drawn, and sometimes enforced. The strata management took a not our problem to solve attitude. The worst of the excessive noise happened when one particular guest would come over to socialize, and drink, and fuck, and laugh in a supremely irritating, exaggerated/theatrical manner. Over time, in the course of normal passing through the common areas of the building, gradually I was able to put a face to her. Eventually I saw that she was the one who left a particular pair of shoes outside the door of the flat she frequented. Early one evening I exited the lift into the corridor on our floor and saw those shoes outside that door. Sure enough, all her greatest hits, louder and louder as the evening progressed. At a certain point I had enough. I fetched a jelly jar from the kitchen, pissed in it, went out in the corridor, no cameras back then, and divided the contents of the jar evenly into her 2 shoes. The noise continued unabated from that flat for hours yet. In the morning the shoes were gone, and I regretfully can't say I heard her shriek or anything. We had taken up an earplug habit to be able to sleep. But I like to think about the surprise she got, no matter which shoe she went for first. Given how often I got to hear guests of that flat drunking it up in the corridor waiting for the lift, I like to think maybe she didn't notice until she was already on the metro. No, of course it did not solve the noise, because there was no line to draw between excessive noise and piss-soaked shoes. Story 4. My coworker's revenge on me. Back when I first started in my industry, a friend of mine from uni landed a job at my company too. The place was 4 levels with an atrium in the middle. I was in the 3rd floor and he was on the 1st floor, but I could see him from my desk. He didn't know this yet and he didn't know where I was seated. Anyway, so I let him get settled in for the morning, then I anonymously message him, "You could do this in on our internal messaging system. Carl, fake name, meet me at my office immediately." I watched as he looked slightly panicked, looking around the office. Then he replies, "Sorry, who is this? And can I ask where your office is?" Me, now, Carl, I don't have time for this. He started to look really panicked, then got up and walked into the atrium, turning round in circles looking at the offices. I felt bad about now and waved down to him saying, "Now, Carl." Being the good-hearted guy he was, he laughed and mouthed "cunt." And I went back to work giggling. A few days later I started hearing a very occasional and very high-pitched ee-like beep in the office I shared with 2 others. It was very subtle. Almost out of our hearing spectrum, to the point where you weren't sure if you were hearing it. But once I did accept I really was hearing it, it became more and more noticeable with each beep. And more irritating. The timing was unpredictable, think 10 minutes between beeps, 30 mins between, 2 mins, 1 hr etc., so I let it go for quite a while before I started to accept I might be going mad and asked the others if they heard it. They both looked almost relieved and said they had, and it was driving them mad too. So we started looking around the office, pulling shelves apart, emptying drawers, pulling pictures down. I even sat outside the office for a few hours to make sure it wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't. We also timed the beeps all day to see if we could find a pattern. No pattern, it seemed completely random. The following day we got serious and started pulling apart our PCs one at a time. We were all looking a bit wild-eyed by this point. Eventually, as I'm sure you've guessed, Carl arrived at the office laughing at us sitting on the floor with our PCs in pieces and told us he'd taped this small evil noise device under a shelf. He said he would have left it longer but our boss thought it had gone on long enough. Touch Carl. Edit, Word. Story 5. Christmas Gift Revenge. This was about 23 years ago. My husband was lousy at giving gifts. He would get what he wanted for himself. That year, I came home to a large box wrapped up, about 10 days before Christmas and he said it was for me. He was so excited. Mind you, we have always been pretty broke, so we, or should I say I, always bought for our children and his greedy family, Mill demands. We always did without. For some reason, I wasn't that excited about this gift. Intuition. Well, Christmas Eve comes and we open gifts. He gets all excited, telling me that I am going to love this present. I open the box, to find a shop vac. We had hardwood and linoleum so I always swept and mopped and had no need for it. He told me that it is wonderful because it cleans up the garage, his domain. Even picks up water. And he said it worked great cause he already tried it before wrapping it up. I was pissed. He bought it for himself. I would have been happy with a $5 necklace that turned my neck green. That night, I wouldn't even go to bed with him. He comes into the living room where I was laying down at and told me to come to bed. I told him I wouldn't because I couldn't look at him. He then tells me how I was extremely selfish because gifts were to be what we as a family could use, not what we would want. I laid there all night and plotted my revenge. I had to wait for a year, but like they say, best served cold. I kept quiet and told nobody of my plan for revenge. 50 weeks later I found it. I wasn't even looking for it, but it was staring right at me as to say here I am and it is time. It was in a huge box. I quickly purchased the gift, got some wrapping paper for it and hid it. Didn't want any sneaky peeks. Christmas Eve, while he was at work, I put the present under the tree. Took 2 rolls of cheap wrapping paper and I put some ribbon and a bow on it. It also had a nice weight for it. We start opening gifts, and I wait a bit. Finally, his eyes light up seeing this big box and finding out it was his. He was so excited, and I told him that this is specially bought for him. He opens the box, to find a case of toilet paper. I then quoted him. Christmas was not for what we would want but what we as a family need or could use. We all wipe. He was furious. He complained to his brothers and everyone. My family and his brothers told him that he deserved the toilet paper. To this day, no husband in my family will ever buy a vacuum cleaner for their wives as gifts. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.